All right,
Oh
now hit me
no.
with now hit me with your dad joke, Brian.
No, okay, now I got the dad joke. So, do you know what they call? Let's see if I get this right because it's so simple, but those are the ones you really flub up typically.
Yeah.
Um, so, do you know what you call a hula hoop with a nail in it?
No, I hmm, not very much fun. What do you call a hula hoop with
It's,
a nail in it?
this is the Navy part. It's a naval destroyer.
All right.
That was one my mom used to tell.
Welcome, folks. We are back here at the Bohemian Cowboy. I am Dillon,
I'm Brian.
and today we're going to start taking you through the history of Bohemians and what this word means for us and why it's part of our title. So, this is going to be describing and defining what the show is all about a little bit. And first, I think, Brian, we should give credit where credit is due. Natalie, your wife, was kind enough to give us the rights to this name, quote unquote.
Yeah, she
That she,
owns these words. Yes.
that's right. Yeah. Trademark, not to be, yeah. She came up with this years ago. So thank you,
Yes.
Natalie, for the
hmm
inspiration and the naming rights. And the
hmm
check is in the mail. So,
It is, yeah. It's funny because we've tagged the moniker a little bit on a couple different endeavors that we're pursuing. I just started a hat company, Bohemian Cowboy hat company. We just call it Boco Hats. But where it originated for us, and I know we'll get into the definition and so forth. I know it's kind of the intent on this podcast, but years ago, Natalie she's always had this interest in having a coffee shop, and she wanted
yeah,
this blending of artistry and creativity, and but we're very much steeped in the Western cowboy lifestyle. And she says, "Oh, it would be a great name for a coffee shop as a Bohemian Cowboy." And we went,
I love it.
"Brilliant!" Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah. And I mean, you said it when you said the name, I was like, oh, I don't know what Bohemian means right off the top of my head, but something about that name just resonated
yeah.
100%.
Well, I thought I did, and we'll get into this. I'll let you
Well,
let you take over here for a little bit, but
let
I thought
me,
I did.
yeah.
I had in my mind what bohemian meant, and then I was like, oh, I need an education, and I got one.
All right. In one sentence, Brian, what does Bohemian mean?
Well, ooh, one sentence. It might take more than that.
Wrong.
Well, see, let's start right where I thought it was. And I always
Yeah.
thought the bohemian was just kind of the hippie, you know, the real loose fitting, multicolored clothes, kind of the you know yeah, just hippie, I guess is probably the way I'd look at it. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I certainly have no problems with hippies. Um, but as I started digging into it, I realized, and this is what Natalie brought to my attention. She said, you might want to look there, cowboy, about what this really means. And it it dates back, and I think for some reason I want to say Hungary. I don't know. I don't know. You might have the information in front of you, uh,
Yep.
but it goes back to these people that traveled, but they were artists, and they were creative, and they, whether it was actually fine arts or music or whatever, it was a mixture of like a vagabond lifestyle, which is very much about like a lot of cowboys. A lot of cowboys will ride for an outfit, and they don't typically leave because, well, the outfit down the road is doing something different or doing something better. It's the same job, but it's new country. It's someplace new to ride and new vistas. And and that's always been my thing, is I've always liked to see what's over the next ridge, kind of like the explorer. And so to me, they were explorers, they were creative, they were artistic, they were, a very tight-knit community. They supported one another. And so to me, it's more than just being a hippie. So
For sure. That's exactly right, Brian. I think you nailed it. We're going to talk today about the original history that you were just talking about, that nomadic lifestyle. So let's get right into it. The word bohemian originally meant one thing and one thing only. It was a person from Bohemia, simply geography. It was a region that is now the Czech Republic, so near Hungary. It was landlocked in Central European, nothing particularly exotic about it. But the name itself came from the Celtic Boii tribe who settled in the area. When the Romans rolled through, they called the land Boihaimum. That's my terrible attempt at Latin, uh, which translated to the home of the
No, I
Boii.
understood exactly what you were saying. Yeah, but then again, I do speak many languages.
Yeah, and one of them is gibberish, which is what I just said. No, but that's Latin. Just breaking down the basics of it, the home of the Boii, so the Boii tribe, and that's all that Bohemian meant for centuries. That was from the 1500s on. Or sorry, then we get to the 15th century France, uh, and this is where it changes. So the Romani people, an ethnic group that originated from northern India, uh, the areas around Punjab and Rajasthan, they didn't have a written history, but genetic evidence suggests that they began a westward migration around the 6th to 11th centuries, traveling through Persia and the Byzantine Empire before reaching Europe. And so, for the purposes of our story, these people came from the Middle East. They had darker features and a different skin tone than Western Europeans because of their homeland and origins. So, when those Romani people arrived in Western Europe, they'd been migrating for generations, right? All from Middle East through Eastern Europe, and eventually ended up in
So
France.
you just took that to a depth that I had no idea existed. That's actually pretty fascinating, because now I can say cowboy, you know,
Oh, I didn't even think about
tag
that.
that in there. Yeah. So
Wow.
no, that's interesting. I didn't realize that the history went that deep and that it was based on linguistics and how things kind of melded together, So hmm.
And these Romani people, it's also it's a geographic thing,
Hmm.
but it's also a cultural thing a little bit. So they were conflated with they were tangled up and associated with Bohemian Hussite heretics. They were, the Hussites were religious reformers, followers of Jan Hus, who'd been burned at the stake in 1415 for challenging Catholic doctrine. And his followers, these Bohemian Hussites, were driven out from their homeland, and that's where they kind of intermingle with these Romani people. These two groups ended up in France. They end up migrating to France, and this is part of that nomadic piece of the tribe, right? They're
Hmm.
they're traveling through Western Europe now. The Romani people arrive in France, and the French people, you know, took one look at them. They're speaking a different language, they have different skin color, and they mashed the two groups together. And so these heretics, this group of Catholic deniers, got mashed up with the Bohemians, and the French word Bohemian became the common term for the Romani people. It's a
Hmm.
complete misnomer, a linguistic disaster, and it's the equivalent of the English word gypsy, which came from an equally wrong belief that the Romani people were from Egypt, which I didn't know that that's where the term gypsy came from.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
English English speakers thought that these people were from Egypt. Same purpose, right? Like darker skin
Well, you could
color.
understand the darker skin
Yep.
and just like humans, we make assumptions.
We make a lot of us. That's
Hmm.
exactly right, Brian. So Egypt or Bohemia, neither one of them correct, but the misnomer was sticky enough to last for centuries. The Romani people were forced to live a nomadic migratory lifestyle on the fringes of conventional society. The word Bohemian became intrinsically linked with these traits. And so the word absorbed concepts. It soaked up ideas like wandering, unconventional living, and a complete disregard for social standards, being an outcast.
Yep.
Yep. And so it was this preloaded idea, and it was preloaded with this idea of heresy and exile from the Hussite connection. So we have this entire identity of a culture of people based around a geographic mistake and a religious prejudice. And uh, just what you said, Brian, like we mislabel people and we make mistakes. You know, we want to
Well,
label people as
I
exotic
wonder,
or
I
other.
wonder now, do Bohemians, from that, from what you're describing, from that heritage, do those people still exist as a bloodline, as a community, or is it just a word now that's given to describe a type of people that live a certain lifestyle? I mean, you know what I mean? Like Bohemians seem to have
Hmm.
an attachment to a to a particular region, particular people. And I thought, excuse me, I think it was interesting that, you know, and maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but that the word Bohemian actually got labeled, got attached to these people in France, which is like
Hmm.
where my heritage is.
Hmm.
I'm a descendant of um, French folks, and so it makes me wonder: was there something genetic in there that or if it really is just a label that got put on people, or if it's something that's actually runs in a bloodline.
I mean, yeah, to some extent, it was the bloodline, right, that then had to move out and migrate, and they were living out on the fringe of society. But then it became a title, it became a label that was put on them, right? It was they were um, inaccurately labeled as
Hmm.
Bohemians, mostly the Romani people that came from the Middle East, right?
Hmm.
Those people were not bloodline Bohemian, but they became labeled as such.
Hmm.
But at some point, the actual Bohemian bloodline, there was a bloodline. I'm not sure when that dies out, but just like with a lot of other a lot of other bloodlines, it gets mixed in with other races and other cultures.
Hmm. Interesting. I wonder where the creativity, because my impression on it was that they were, and I guess maybe it's because of the maybe just the mental image, because of again, I used to uh, kind of correlate Bohemian with gypsy and that whole kind of lifestyle. And with the gypsies, there always seemed to be like a lot of song and dance, and whether that really is true or whether that's just something that the brain picks up or something that was
Mm.
portrayed by Hollywood, and it just kind of stuck and it became this label that gypsies do this thing, like they have the campfires in the evening, they're singing and dancing. But honestly, I think singing and dancing is a part of pretty much every culture out there, whether you're nomadic or not. There's always
Yeah.
an element of creativity, that exists in all cultures. I think that's kind of why music is universal. You may not understand the lyrics or something of someone singing, but musically, you can, there's just the rhythms and so forth. And whether it's, percussive stuff that's coming out of Africa, or, whether it's the stringed instruments, out of the British Isles and whatever, there's still like a rhythm and a resonance that people can just kind of sit there, doesn't matter from that area or not. Somebody's playing music, you start tapping your foot and going, yeah, I
Yeah.
like that.
You have touched on the missing piece in my research here. Um, because
There's a flaw.
we're about to jump ahead to a different piece of like the artistry in the Bohemian community. But
Hmm.
you're absolutely right. I think it's really important to remember that these nomadic people living out there in the 15th, 16th century were 100. I mean, they were absolutely sitting around in the evenings. They had a community, right? I mean, they were all the same people traveling together, living closely with each other. They were absolutely singing and dancing in the evenings to just, I mean, deal with the human condition, which is like,
Hmm.
look, life is tough out here. We're hated, and these people don't want us to be here. So in order for us to stay together, we have to have this, kind of common. language that we speak, which I think would be music. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And
So
I don't have a good story about it in here, but
yeah,
anecdotally,
make something up. No one will know.
yeah, that's
Just
right.
just shoot from the hip here, Dylan.
Okay, so this title of Bohemian that was placed on them by the French, it kind of sits dormant for a long time. And it sat there waiting for someone to pick it up and use it in a completely different way. So that happens in 19th century Paris. Let's fast forward a few centuries. 1830s and 1840s. Paris is churning. The city is convulsing with social and industrial change. The old aristocratic order is crumbling, and the bourgeois, the I think that's how you say that, right?
Boy,
The
man,
bourgeois,
you are a linguist. You
the merchant class is rising. Money is becoming the new measure of worth, and capitalism is grinding its gears into every aspect of life. And everything is becoming commodified, transactional. In the midst of all this, the crowded streets and cheap lodgings of neighborhoods like the Latin Quarter, inside of those neighborhoods, there's a different kind of person. Young, creative artists, writers, poets, intellectuals, people who look at the new materialistic society and think, no, that's not for me. So they're living on sixth floor of these apartment buildings, walk ups with no heat, cold floorboards. The air is thick, turpentine and linseed oil from their canvases, bitter coffee dregs in chipped cups, cheap tobacco, and a single light bulb. You can picture this, right? Casting long shadows over their paintings. And then there's a half empty bottle of wine over there in the corner. This is the birthplace of the modern bohemian as we kind of think of it as the early days. Not a mistaken identity. This is their choice, right? So these writers are consciously abandoning the conventions of society that they found restrictive, materialistic, and soul crushing. The term transferred from the Romani people to this new social tribe, impoverished young creatives who prioritize their art above everything else. And I think this is where one of the places where we start to relate to this bohemian ideology, is this turning point from the lifestyle of nomads and outcasts, which is certainly part of it. I think when we get to the cowboy aspect of it, that theme will come back in. But the bohemian side to me is more of art for art's sake, right? Like doing art because it speaks to your soul, and it's not about living in this posh society of mid 1800s Paris. Waking up every day to struggle with for a life of beauty for beauty's sake and not make much money off of it, I think is one of the ideals
hmm
that we can appreciate about this group
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah. Well, I think yeah. Yeah, the artistic side of things. Yeah, it seems like our species has always wanted to create. It's like an innate part of us, and it's kind of funny because the path that I've taken, um, and the choices I've made, a lot of them have been made because not I I guess you would say art, but it's not the traditional maybe form of art, and kind of like like you're in a very artistic field, when you break it down, I mean you're a licensed architect. Well, that's very creative and very artistic,
Yeah.
and somebody once told me that, I think it was maybe France. He didn't tell me. I think it was in a book that Francis Ching wrote, that he said architecture is the art of building, which
Yep.
I can kind of get behind that. Um, but anyway, I remember, growing up, uh, I I was always drawing and sketching and
Mm,
building and stuff like that.
doodling. Yeah.
The doodling, yeah. In fact, back in 1979. I remember exactly. My parents had built the house that my dad's still in. And when they were building it, they were, had all this sheetrock up in the garage. They were finishing the house, but it was just like blank sheetrock, no paint or anything like that. Well, I looked at that and said, there's a canvas.
That's a really
And
big canvas.
and I did, yeah, and I did this, excuse me, I did this huge mural, this landscape. But it was all in pencil. I didn't have paints or anything like that.
Yeah.
I just took a pencil. I drew this whole landscape on the side of my parents' garage on the inside. And after I did it, I was standing back. I was like, Dad's gonna kill me. And and which he didn't, obviously. My mom come in and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I loved it." That mural stayed there until they renovated and the garage ended up becoming a part of their family room. But that
Hmm.
thing stayed up. It was there, the entire time, just this graphite drawing on the side of the garage. Well, moving forward a little bit, through growing up through elementary school up into junior high, high school and stuff, I always took whatever art class was available. I mean, I was
Yeah.
heavy on the arts, very heavy. And I remember I must have been 10th or 11th grade. I can't remember. And anyway, I was, taking an art class and so forth. And my art teacher was this little Italian gal. And she took me aside. She said, you have potential here. She said, have you considered being an artist? And I remember at one point, a lot of things happened, transpired, through this short period of time. But I remember sitting across the desk from the school guidance counselor because we were starting to figure out, well, where are you going to go, kid? What are you going to do? And a lot of kids are, going into industrial stuff. People are going either into, or they're going to law school or they're going to become an engineer or whatnot. And I was talking about being an artist. And I remember distinctly, and I won't throw his name out there because you never know who's listening. And he's probably long since gone anyway. But um, I remember him looking at me, going, "Hey," he says, "art is a great hobby." He says, "But you'll never make a living at it." And again, tying back into the money side of things, the capitalism side of it is like, oh, well, that's the important thing. The
Right.
important thing is that you make money. And so I never pursued it. I mean, I still did, but just as a hobby. And
Hmm.
and that probably led me down another path, but it's okay. It's the path I'm on. But even at that, I remember still being immersed in things that were artistic. Like I went through school and became, it was basically a drafting course, but it was one on steroids. So basically, the the courses I took, it was like a kind of like a condensed version of, it's basically going through a lot of architectural training, but you didn't come out with a bachelor's degree because I didn't have like the English and the history and all the stuff. It was pretty
Hmm.
much 100% design
Just
related.
drafting and
We did strength of materials and all that kind of stuff, calcs and
really.
oh yeah, I
Wow.
did. Oh yeah, I did doing sizing beams and figuring out torque on a shaft if you've got a pulley on this end and a pulley on this end and how much
Yeah.
torque is there and did all that stuff. But anyway, I
Brian,
remember.
you're more qualified to be an architect than most architects with that training right there.
So, well, yeah, I mean, I can size, I can size me. I can't stamp them because I never got to see anything like that, but I can size structurals and stuff like that. Well, I don't know if I can now. It's been so long, and
Yeah.
everything's done by software now. Uh,
Yeah, that's
but
true.
but anyway, as I was going through this class, the very beginning of these studies, they were all the same until you got to a fork in the road, basically, and you had to choose um a pathway towards architecture. You had to choose a pathway towards mechanical, like mechanical
Mm.
engineering and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I remember getting to that point, and everybody was telling me, "Go mechanical, go mechanical. You will, you'll always have work in mechanical. You'll always find a job. You can work for General Motors. You can work for all these things. It's
Sure.
all gears and ball bearings and that type of thing."
A
And
lot more applications for that.
exactly. And it was during a time in the economy where architecture was not, there wasn't a lot of building going on,
Mm. Hmm.
Um, but I contrary to convention, I chose architecture instead, and that led me down a different path. But to me, architecture felt more creative. I didn't even realize at the time why I was doing it.
Right.
But it was just something inside me that said, no, this is the direction you need to choose. And I guess had I chosen the other path, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
That's probably true. Yeah.
No. So anyway, so I guess there's always been that creativity, side of things that has kind of driven me. But the funny thing is, after I chose to go down a more creative route, I've never been out of work. I've never been in a place where it's like I'm not supporting myself.
Makes you think, had you not listened to that counselor back in the day, right? If you started just kind of following your heart, following that path from day one, how would that have been different? Your early years.
Mm, yeah. I don't know. You have no way of knowing. There's
Yeah,
no way of looking back and saying, well, I would have ended up here. Because honestly, in choosing the path that I chose, and we'll get more into the cowboy side of things, I know, a little bit later, but choosing the path that I chose, I may have still ended up here, because I have a history in agriculture as
sure.
well as
Yeah, yeah,
the creative side. So, and I ended up, you know, you know, coming out west. I'm from Pennsylvania, Northwest PA, up in the Allegheny Mountains, and ended up coming west through a series of events. And some people would consider heartbreaking, and other people say it's just life. And you know, I don't I don't think there's really any one way to describe it. It's just a path.
yeah.
Uh, but
I think you.
I
I think you
I
always
still I
would.
still would have been I still would have been a cowboy,
Yeah,
honestly.
you would have had the balance of both in you at all times, right? Like your heart was moving in those two directions. One was creative, and one was um, rural, agricultural in some
Hmm.
way.
Yeah,
So I think regardless, you would have ended up somewhere around where you are in the middle. I
yeah,
think
I think so.
not physically, maybe not geographically, but
Yeah.
yeah. Let's introduce a new character to this story. Henry Merger. That's Merger with a G, not a D.
Mm.
Henry Merger was a writer and himself living this precarious artistic lifestyle. In the 1840s, he began publishing a collection of stories. And my French is terrible here, but let me give it a shot. Collection of stories called Scènes de la Vie de Bohème.
Wow.
Yeah, did you like that?
I was transported to a cafe in Paris just
So you could
in an
the
instant.
cigarette immediately went into my mouth, and I
Exactly. My
was
little beret. You're
Scènes de la Vie de Bohème. That was better when I had the cigarette in my
that
mouth.
was, yeah. You need to get that raspy growl. There you go.
Yeah. All right. So it means scenes of bohemian life, as you might imagine. And these weren't just stories. They were manifestos disguised as fiction. So Merger painted a romantic picture of this world of bohemians. He focused on the themes of passionate friendship, idealization of art as a higher calling, and the critical noble contempt for money. Not just poverty, but a philosophical rejection of wealth as a measure of worth. And his work did something crucial. It legitimized the movement. It gave it a narrative, and it turned what could have been dismissed as youthful irresponsibility into a lifestyle and an identity. The definition solidified in real time, and you can see this happen in the historical review, the historical record. The 1862, the Westminster Review, a British periodical, captured it perfectly when it said, "A bohemian is simply an artist or litterateur who consciously or unconsciously secedes from conventionality in life and in art." I think that's a pretty good definition.
Okay. See, you were just talking about um, how he was saying that, art was elevated and so forth, and that was important, and it was kind of a fundamental piece of the Bohemian.
Yeah.
Natalie and I were talking the other day, and it came up, and I didn't. Yeah, this it's kind of an interesting little play, and I really never thought about art this way. So she had taken a trip to Italy not too long ago with some
Yeah.
friends, and she said, number one, I need to go. Just number one for the architecture. She said it's one thing you know, seeing it in photos and stuff like that, and but she said to actually be there and see the magnificence,
Experience it.
yeah, and the artistry of it. Um, but she got to see a lot of Michelangelo's work, yeah, while she was over there. And she said it was interesting, like the curator, or I guess that's who it would have been, was talking about art in that day during the Renaissance and so forth. And I'm not exactly sure time frame when the Renaissance occurred and how this maybe plays into the era of the Bohemian. I'm not sure where the time frames are, but he was telling her that a lot of the artwork that was done, especially by Michelangelo, he said was done to tell a story because the masses
Mm.
at that point were uneducated and they couldn't read. So it's not like they could open a book or open scrolls and stuff and read them. So he painted pictures, he did artwork to convey a story, and that was their way. That was so the masses could understand, what was going on because it was obviously verbal, but they couldn't read, and it just to me it shed a new light on art itself and what it does,
Yeah.
and like because we talked about how music is universal and it ties, ties things together, ties people together.
So is
Yeah,
a painting, right?
yeah, exactly. You can look at a painting and go, wow, and it doesn't matter what nationality you're from. You see something and it tells a story. You understand what's going on. So it's kind of
Well, throughout history, especially back then, churches were the places where all the money was spent, right? On architecture, but also in creating art for it. And so, Michelangelo and some of these other people, if you look back at those old churches, that's where all the great paintings and murals were done. And
hmm
typically what they were along the clear story or the upper section of the inside of churches was telling the story of the Bible, or of Christ, or
hmm
um, Catholic churches were notorious for paintings and iconography that told the story, because if you didn't speak Latin, I guess if you're from somewhere else, but they wanted to portray the story to other people in other languages, again, there's a visual representation of it. But also, because in Catholicism, and if you couldn't read in Catholicism, they don't really give you a Bible, but in other religions, if you couldn't read, is the same story, right? That there was a story in paintings that anybody could see from the time you were little, attending those, to the time you were older. You were like, oh, I know the stories because I've seen them.
hmm
That's 100%. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a universal language that doesn't
Yeah.
require anything but two eyes and some imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's it may sound kind of hokey, but I think it's important that people tell their story and that people live their story, and you
Yeah.
know not necessarily keeping with Bohemian traditions is you don't have to necessarily do things that are conventional. There's everything that we've been taught and told, from when coming into this world as this pure little being, and then all of a sudden, throughout the years, we get story after story after story layered on top. Some of those stories service, some of them don't,
Mm.
necessarily. We're told to do things because for no other reason, and that's the way we've always done it, or that's the way we should do it. And should's kind of an odd word to use because a lot of times there's no logistics behind it, and things
Hmm.
like that. So you know, I think it's okay to live life on your terms. As long as you're not doing any harm, not not causing any kind of hardship for someone else and infringing on someone else's rights. But I think it's okay. It's okay to be different. It's okay to to live a lifestyle that most most people don't. And to me, that's partly partly where the cowboy comes in. Is
Absolutely.
Cowboys are very non-traditional. They have they probably have more money tied up in their saddle than they do their truck,
Right.
and half of them don't even have a truck, Uh, their housing is what the ranch provides. Sometimes it's a rundown old bunkhouse, and sometimes it could be nice housing, but you never know. They're doing what they do because of the lifestyle, not because it feeds into a capitalistic type machine, and it definitely doesn't feed into a socialistic machine either. They're doing their own thing. The true cowboys, well, we'll get into that because there's, a lot of people. I think there's a misnomer on what cowboy is, and I think, cowboy has more to do, or as much to do. I won't say more to do with, how you live your life necessarily than what you do for a living. It's not necessarily on the back of a horse. I mean, it can be. That's where it started, but same with Bohemian. Its translation has changed over the years.
That's exactly right, Brian. That's exactly right. We'll get there. We'll get to the cowboy uh, evolution of the word as well. Okay, so Henry Merger, to truly cement the image
Could you say
of
that with that French accent again? Monsieur.
Henry Merger,
There you go. There you go.
he started to create this public image, right, of the Bohemian with his writings. But to make it immortal, took opera. So in 1896, Giacomo Puccini, you see that? That was good, right?
That was good.
Giacomo Puccini composed La Boheme, which
No.
was based directly on Merger's stories. And if you've ever heard Puccini's music, the soaring arias and the way the strings swell and break your heart, you understand what kind of power it held. So La Boheme is a tragedy, the story of Rodolfo, who's a poet, and Mimi, who's a seamstress. They're young, they're poor, they're in love, and ultimately doomed. Mimi dies of tuberculosis in the final act. She's the starving artist, the passionate poet, the carefree painter, all of these kinds of ideas. And it's all immortalized in Puccini's score at the opera. So the opera tours Europe and is performed in every major city, and suddenly the image is fixed in public consciousness forever. The Bohemian isn't just a real person struggling in Paris, it's more of a romantic ideal. And of course, what the opera audiences didn't see was the actual tuberculosis and the actual hunger and the actual desperation of trying to make rent when your landlord doesn't accept paintings as payment. And we start to see here a little bit of the ideal being removed from the reality of the people, which will become more of a theme in the story on the next episode. Let's take stock here, Brian, of what we've seen today. The word Bohemian began as a simple geographic designation, people from Bohemia. Then, through misunderstanding in 15th century France, it was applied to the Romani people, conflated with religious heretics and loaded with ideas of wandering, otherness, and exile from conventional society. That label sat dormant for centuries until 19th century Paris, where artists, writers, and intellectuals looked at their self imposed exile and said, that's what we want. We want to buck the societal norm. So they claimed it, romanticized it. Henry Merger wrote it into legend, and Puccini composed it into immortality. By the end of the 19th century, the Bohemian was no longer just a person. It was a symbol and a way of life that said art matters more than money, passion matters more than propriety, and freedom, even if it means poverty, means more than security. That idea, the Bohemian legend, was now ready to be exported around the world. Because when it is an idea, it travels faster than an actual group of people. But to understand that story, the American Bohemian, we have to look at what was happening in places like Greenwich Village in the early 20th century. And we have to talk about the Beat Generation, counterculture, and how this ideal of the starving artist mutated into something uniquely American.
Uh,
That is the story for next time.
all the Dillons and the Joan Baez. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Great. All right.
Yeah.
This has been our first craft conversation. I'm Dylan,
And I'm Brian.
and we hope you'll stop by for the next one right here at the Bohemian Cowboy.
Have a good one.